On the evening of my 70th birthday, my only son, the boy I had raised alone after his father's death, looked straight into my eyes and said, "Mom, you're getting too old to handle your finances. It's time you signed everything over to me." That same night, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. One he never saw coming because he had absolutely no idea about the fortune I'd quietly built over decades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The vanilla buttercream cake sat untouched on my dining table, its 70 unlit candles a sad reminder of the celebration that should have been. I'd spent the morning preparing my son's favorite meal, roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, glazed carrots, and homemade gravy, the same dinner I'd made for every special occasion since he was a child. The kitchen still smelled of herbs and slow-cooked meat, but the plates remained in the cabinet, the good silver unwrapped but never set. My name is Eleanor Winters. At 70 years old, I had hoped to spend my birthday surrounded by family. My son James, his wife Veronica, and their twin daughters. I'd even bought the girls those art supply kits they'd been asking for, wrapped in shimmering paper with butterflies. Everything was ready by 5 o'clock, but the hours ticked by without even a phone call. When the doorbell finally rang at 8:30 p.m., I rushed to answer it, relief washing over me. But instead of the warm family gathering I'd anticipated, James stood alone on my porch, briefcase in hand, his expression all business. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. No hug, no gift, not even an apology for being late. "Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" I led him to the living room, trying to hide my disappointment. "I made your favorite dinner," I said, gesturing toward the kitchen. "We could eat while we talk. Where are Veronica and the girls?" "They couldn't make it," he replied dismissively, setting his briefcase on the coffee table. "Veronica has a charity function, and the girls have gymnastics practice, but that's not why I'm here." He snapped open the briefcase, revealing neat stacks of documents. "Mom, we need to discuss your finances and living arrangements. I've been concerned for some time now." I settled into my armchair, suddenly aware of how he was studying the room, eyes lingering on the slightly faded curtains, the outdated television, the modest furnishings of the home I'd owned for 40 years. The home where I'd raised him alone, after his father died when James was only 10. "What concerns?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the knot forming in my stomach. "You're 70 now, Mom. Living alone in this big house, managing your own money, it's becoming a risk." He didn't look at me as he began spreading papers across the table. "I've researched some excellent assisted living facilities. Woodridge Manor is very nice, and they have financial advisors who work with residents. I don't need assisted living, James. I'm perfectly healthy and capable." He sighed, that patronizing sound I'd come to recognize in recent years, the sound that said he knew better than his aging mother. "It's not about what you need right now. It's about planning ahead. Your pension from the school district isn't going to cover proper care if your health declines." I almost laughed. My pension from 35 years of teaching elementary school was indeed modest, but it was only a fraction of my actual income. James, however, had assumed it was my sole financial resource for years, an assumption I'd never corrected. "I've been managing just fine," I said carefully. "Have you? This house needs repairs. Your car is 12 years old. You haven't redecorated since the 90s. He gestured around as if the lack of trendy furniture was evidence of financial distress, rather than personal preference. "Mom, I'm worried you're too proud to admit you're struggling." The irony of his concern might have been amusing if it hadn't been so deeply insulting. While James saw an elderly widow living frugally on a teacher's pension, the reality was quite different. What my son didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that beneath my modest exterior lay a financial portfolio worth millions. It had begun with a small inheritance from my grandmother when I was 25, $50,000 that most young couples would have spent on a house down payment. But Richard, my late husband, had been a financial analyst with an almost prophetic ability to spot emerging market trends. "This could be seed money for our future," he'd said. "Let's invest it and pretend it doesn't exist." Together, we researched companies, studied market patterns, and made our first careful investments. When Richard died unexpectedly 15 years later, I was left with a grieving 10-year-old son and an investment portfolio worth just over $300,000, substantial, but not enough to support us indefinitely. I could have withdrawn from the market, then used the money to make our lives more comfortable in the short term. Instead, I continued what Richard and I had started. While teaching full-time and raising James, I educated myself about finance through night classes, investment books, and online courses. I made calculated decisions, reinvested dividends, weathered market downturns without panic selling, and gradually expanded our portfolio. By the time James left for college, our initial $50,000 had grown to nearly $1, $2 million. By my retirement at 65, that amount had more than tripled. Now, at 70, my net worth approached $5 million, all carefully managed, diversified, and grown through decades of patient strategy and financial discipline. Not once had I touched the principal or the growth for myself. I lived comfortably but modestly on my teacher's pension, preserving the investments for a purpose I'd held close for 20 years. To establish an educational foundation in Richard's name when the time was right. James knew none of this. After Richard died, I'd made a conscious decision to raise my son without emphasis on money or material wealth. I wanted him to develop character, work ethic, and personal responsibility rather than expecting an inheritance to solve his problems. I helped with his college education, but encouraged him to work summer jobs and take out modest student loans to appreciate the value of his education. As I watched him now, arranging power of attorney documents and assisted living brochures on my coffee table, I realized my approach had failed in ways I hadn't anticipated. Instead of developing empathy and respect, James had grown into a man who saw his aging mother as a burden to be managed, a financial liability to be contained. "I've taken the liberty of drafting these documents," he continued, pushing a folder toward me. "It's a durable power of attorney and irrevocable trust. I'd be named as your financial conservator, which means I could ensure your assets are properly managed. It's for your protection, Mom." My protection. The phrase hung in the air between us, its insincerity palpable. This wasn't about protecting me. It was about controlling my perceived limited assets before I could squander them on myself. "And the house?" I asked quietly, already knowing the answer. "It would make sense to sell it," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "The market is strong right now. The proceeds could help fund your care at Woodridge. Their premium apartments have daily housekeeping and meal service." I studied my son's face, the determined set of his jaw, the practiced concern in his expression, the absolute certainty that he was doing what was best for me, or rather, what was best for him under the guise of helping me. "This is quite a lot to consider on my birthday," I said finally. "I'll need time to review everything." Irritation flashed across his features. "Mom, I've taken time away from work to handle this. The sooner we get everything transferred, the better positioned we'll be for tax purposes." "We?" I echoed. "The family," he clarified quickly. "These decisions affect all of us. Veronica and I are trying to save for the girls' college funds, and if we have to support you unexpectedly—" "I've never asked for your financial support, James." "Not yet," he countered. "But medical emergencies happen, especially at your age. Long-term care isn't cheap. I'm trying to be pragmatic here." Pragmatic. That was the word that finally broke something inside me. The last thread of hope that my son's concerns might be genuinely about my well-being rather than his inheritance. I stood up slowly, straightening to my full height. I think you should leave now. Mom, don't be emotional about this. It's simple financial planning. No, James. It's simple disrespect. My voice remained calm, belying the storm brewing within. You come to my home on my birthday, without your family, without so much as a card, and instead bring documents for me to sign away my autonomy. That's not financial planning. That's ageism and entitlement. His face hardened. I'm trying to help you before you make costly mistakes. At my age, I interrupted. I've earned the right to make my own decisions without being treated like an incompetent child. Now please leave. Take your documents with you. For a moment, James looked genuinely shocked, not by his own behavior, but by my resistance to it. He'd expected compliance, perhaps even gratitude for his intervention. Instead, he gathered his papers with sharp, angry movements, stuffing them back into his briefcase. You're being irrational, he said, standing. I'll give you some time to think about this, but we need to address it soon. Your cognitive abilities won't improve with time. The casual cruelty of his assessment struck me like a physical blow. This was my son, the boy whose skinned knees I had bandaged, whose nightmares I had soothed, whose college graduation had filled me with more pride than any investment return ever could. As the front door closed behind him, I remained standing in my living room, the untouched birthday cake a fitting metaphor for the celebration that never happened. But amid the hurt and disappointment, something else was crystallizing. Resolve. That evening, I made a phone call I'd been considering for years, but had repeatedly postponed, hoping my relationship with James might eventually evolve into something warmer, more trusting. The call was to Bernard Hoffman, my financial advisor, of 25 years, and one of the few people who knew the true extent of my assets. It's time, Bernie, I said when he answered. I'm ready to move forward with the foundation, and I need to make some other changes as well. Are you sure, Eleanor? He asked, concern evident in his voice. This is a significant decision. I've never been more certain, I replied, looking at the family photo on my mantel, taken when James was 16, before money and status became his primary measures of value. It's time my assets served their true purpose, and it's time I stopped living as if I have something to apologize for. When I hung up, I walked to the dining room and finally lit the 70 candles on my birthday cake. As their warm glow illuminated the room, I made a wish unlike any I'd made before. Not for reconciliation or understanding, but for the courage to live my remaining years with authenticity and purpose. My son thought I was an elderly woman with dwindling resources who needed his protection from herself. He had no idea that the real financial power in our family had always rested in my hands, and now, finally, I was ready to use it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The morning after my confrontation with James, I woke before dawn, my mind still processing the painful interaction with my son. Sleep had come fitfully, interrupted by replays of his condescending tone, the casual dismissal of my autonomy, and the hurt that lingered beneath my anger. As the first light filtered through my bedroom curtains, I realized I had spent my entire night thinking about James rather than focusing on my own path forward. This pattern was familiar, putting my son's needs, feelings, and perspectives before my own. Even now, when he had treated me with such disrespect, my instinct was to worry about our relationship rather than protect myself. This realization was both uncomfortable and necessary. I rose, made coffee, and carried it to my home office, a small room off the kitchen that James had likely never entered in his adult life. Inside, far from appearing neglected or outdated like the rest of my home, this space reflected my true self. A powerful desktop computer sat on a sleek, modern desk. Multiple financial monitors tracked market movements in real time. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes on investment strategy, tax law, and financial planning, many dog-eared and annotated in my meticulous handwriting. This room was the command center from which I had quietly built my fortune over decades, and not once had James shown any interest in what his financially naive mother might be doing in here. The irony wasn't lost on me. I logged into my investment accounts, confirming what I already knew: $87 million across diversified holdings, blue-chip stocks, government and corporate bonds, international index funds, carefully selected real estate investment trusts, and even a modest allocation in cryptocurrency that had performed remarkably well. The numbers on the screen represented countless hours of research, disciplined decision-making, and patient growth. My phone rang, startling me. Bernard Hoffman, right on schedule. "Good morning, Eleanor," he said when I answered. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night. Are you certain about accelerating the foundation timeline? We had planned to launch it after your 75th birthday." "I'm certain, Bernie," I replied, sipping my coffee. "Recent events have clarified my priorities. May I ask what prompted this change? You've been so methodical about everything for 25 years. I hesitated, reluctant to share the painful details of James's behavior. For decades, I had protected my son's image, making excuses for his growing materialism and self-absorption, even to my closest confidants. But that protection had become a form of self-betrayal. "James visited yesterday," I said finally. "He brought power of attorney documents and brochures for assisted living facilities. He believes I'm cognitively declining and financially vulnerable." Bernard's sharp intake of breath was audible over the phone. "That's absurd. You're one of the most financially astute clients I've ever worked with, regardless of age. He doesn't know that." "By your choice, Eleanor," Bernard reminded me gently. "You've deliberately maintained the image of living modestly on your pension." "I wanted him to develop character, not entitlement," I said, the justification sounding hollow even to my own ears. "I thought eventually I'd share everything with him, once he demonstrated he understood the value of money beyond what it could buy. And now? Now I see that withholding information doesn't necessarily teach wisdom. Perhaps I've enabled his assumptions by never challenging them." Bernard was silent for a moment. "What would you like to do, beyond establishing the foundation?" I looked at the family photograph on my desk. James at his high school graduation, my arm around his shoulders, both of us smiling. When had that proud, idealistic young man transformed into someone who could dismiss his mother's autonomy so easily? "I need to restructure everything," I said decisively. "The foundation will receive the bulk of the assets, as we've discussed before. But I also want to establish a trust for my granddaughter's education that James cannot access or control. And I want to make some changes to my living situation." "Changes? You've always been adamant about staying in your home." "I still am," I clarified. "But I'm tired of living as if I'm one step away from financial hardship. I've denied myself simple comforts and updates to maintain this facade of modest means. That ends now." After finishing the call with Bernard, who promised to begin the legal paperwork immediately, I did something I had never done before. I called Sarah Lancaster, my closest friend and fellow retired teacher, and told her everything: my secret wealth, James's behavior, and my decision to stop hiding my financial reality. "I knew you were careful with money," Sarah said when I finished. "But millions? Eleanor, how did you keep this secret for so long?" "It was surprisingly easy," I admitted. "People see what they expect to see. Everyone assumed a public school teacher would retire with modest means, so that's what they saw. Including James. Especially James. Sometimes I wonder if I made a terrible mistake, never showing him this side of me. Perhaps if he had seen his mother confidently managing investments and making financial decisions, he wouldn't be so quick to assume I'm incompetent now." Sarah sighed. "Don't blame yourself for his behavior, Ellie. You raised him alone, gave him every advantage, and made conscious choices about the values you wanted to instill. His decision to treat you with such disrespect is his alone. Her words loosened something tight in my chest. Permission to stop excusing my son's behavior, to acknowledge the hurt without taking responsibility for his choices. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Live truthfully," I said, surprising myself with the clarity of my response. Starting with my home. That afternoon, I did something that would have been unthinkable just days before. I called Adrienne Porter, the most sought-after interior designer in our city, whose work I had secretly admired in home magazines for years. "Ms. Porter's office," a polished voice answered. "Yes, hello. My name is Eleanor Winters. I'd like to schedule a consultation with Ms. Porter for a complete home renovation." "I'm afraid Ms. Porter is booking consultations approximately 7 months out for new clients. I'd be happy to refer you to an associate designer who might have earlier availability." I took a deep breath. "Please inform Ms. Porter that this would be a comprehensive project with a flexible budget in the mid-six figures. I'm particularly interested in her work on the Briarwood estate that was featured in Architectural Digest last year." The momentary silence on the other end was telling. "One moment, Mrs. Winters." Minutes later, I was speaking with Adrienne Porter herself, who had suddenly found an opening in her schedule the following week. As I described my vision for transforming my home while honoring its history, I felt a growing lightness. For decades, I had denied myself these small luxuries, not because I couldn't afford them, but because they didn't fit the narrative I had constructed about who I was supposed to be. That evening, as I prepared a simple dinner for myself, my phone chimed with a text from James. "Mom, I've been thinking about our conversation. I only want what's best for you. Let's talk again when you're feeling less emotional about this. The Woodridge representative can meet with us next week." The message perfectly encapsulated his approach, framing my legitimate objections as emotional reactions, while reasserting his timeline and preferences. A week ago, I might have acquiesced, might have agreed to the meeting to maintain peace. But something fundamental had shifted. I typed a response, then deleted it. Typed again, deleted again. Finally, I set the phone aside without answering. My son had dominated my thoughts and concerns for too long. Tonight, I would focus on myself, on the life I was finally choosing to live openly. The next morning brought another call, this time from an unexpected source. Veronica, James's wife, rarely contacted me directly. "Eleanor," she began, her voice carrying its usual blend of formality and distance. "James told me about your situation. I wanted to see if you'd reconsidered his suggestions." "Good morning to you too, Veronica," I replied calmly. "Which situation are you referring to? My birthday passing without acknowledgement from my family? Or my son attempting to seize control of my assets?" Her sharp inhale suggested she hadn't expected such directness. "Eleanor, there's no need to be defensive. We're trying to help." "Are you?" Because from my perspective, help would look like respect for my autonomy and recognition of my capabilities. It would look like celebrating my 70th birthday with family rather than bringing legal documents. "The girls had gymnastics practice," she said stiffly. "The girls have had gymnastics practice on my last 3 birthdays. At Christmas. And at Thanksgiving," I observed. Strangely flexible scheduling for a competitive sport. Silence stretched between us. Finally, Veronica spoke, her voice cooler. "James is concerned about your financial situation. The house needs significant updates, and your pension." "My financial situation," I interrupted, "is not your concern. Nor is it James's. That's what I tried to communicate on my birthday." "This hostility isn't helpful, Eleanor. If you're struggling to accept help, perhaps we should involve Dr. Mercer." Dr. Mercer was James's longtime friend and a geriatric specialist. A connection I hadn't previously found suspicious, but now viewed in a new light. "That won't be necessary," I said firmly. Please tell James that I won't be discussing power of attorney or assisted living options. Not next week, not ever. My mind is clear, my finances are in order, and my decisions are my own. I see. Veronica's tone conveyed clear disapproval. Well, when you've had time to think things through, we'll be here. After hanging up, I sat in my garden, allowing the morning sunshine and the scent of blooming roses to calm my racing heart. These confrontations, first with James, now with Veronica, were painful but necessary. For too long, I had accepted subtle diminishment, had allowed my son and his wife to define me through their limited perception. Their attempts to control me under the guise of concern were not new. What was new was my refusal to accommodate them. As painful as these realizations were, they brought clarity. The path forward wasn't about convincing James or Veronica of my competence. It was about living according to my own values and capabilities, with or without their understanding. Later that day, I made two decisions that marked the beginning of this new chapter. First, I called a contractor recommended by Sarah to begin immediate repairs on my home's exterior: the sagging gutter, the cracked sidewalk, the aging fence, that James had pointed to as evidence of my inability to maintain my property. Second, I contacted my bank to transfer $100,000 to a new personal account, funds specifically designated for my own enjoyment after decades of deliberate frugality. That evening, as I sat at my computer reviewing the preliminary foundation documents Bernard had sent over, I felt something unexpected. Not anger or hurt, but a profound sense of liberation. For years, I had confined myself to a narrow identity, the modest widow, the retired teacher living carefully within limited means. Breaking free of that self-imposed constraint felt like taking a full breath after years of shallow breathing. James had attempted to diminish me, to reduce me to a problem requiring his management. But in doing so, he had inadvertently catalyzed my emergence into a fuller, more authentic expression of myself. The painful truth of his perception had finally freed me from seeking his approval or understanding. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, difficult conversations, and complex emotions. But tonight, for the first time in decades, I was making decisions based solely on my own values and desires, without filtering them through the lens of others' expectations. And in that liberation lay a power I had always possessed, but rarely claimed: the power to define myself. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity unlike anything I had experienced since retirement. My home, once a carefully maintained shrine to modesty, transformed into a hub of purposeful change. Contractors arrived to repair the exterior issues. An electrician updated the outdated wiring system. A landscaping crew revitalized my long-neglected garden, planting vibrant perennials that would return year after year. Inside, I worked with Adrienne Porter on designs that would honor the home's character while finally reflecting my true aesthetic preferences. After decades of practical beige walls and serviceable furniture chosen for durability rather than beauty, I selected rich colors, elegant fixtures, and comfortable yet sophisticated furnishings. "You have exquisite taste, Mrs. Winters," Adrienne observed during our third consultation. "I'm curious why you've waited so long to undertake these renovations." The question gave me pause. How could I explain that I had deliberately maintained a home below my means to teach my son values that he had ultimately rejected anyway? I was living someone else's story, I said finally. Now I'm writing my own. Adrienne smiled. "Well, I'm delighted to help with this new chapter. These changes will completely transform your living environment while preserving the home's historical integrity." As contractors measured and planned, I also met with Bernard and his team of legal experts to accelerate the establishment of the Richard Winters Educational Foundation. Named for my late husband, the foundation would provide college, scholarships and resources for aspiring teachers from underprivileged backgrounds, A significant portion of my assets would fund this endowment, ensuring Richard's legacy would support education for generations. Eleanor, this is an incredibly meaningful way to honor Richard, Bernard said as we finalized the foundational documents. But I want to make sure you're not making these decisions reactively because of your situation with James. I'm not, I assured him. I've been planning this foundation for 20 years. What's changed is my timeline and my willingness to do this publicly rather than anonymously. And the rest of your assets? The educational trusts for my granddaughters will be established immediately, with funds accessible only for legitimate educational expenses. They'll receive additional disbursements at 25, 30, and 35, contingent upon completing their education. And James? The question hung between us, unavoidable and complex. Despite his recent behavior, he was still my son, the child I had raised alone, the last living connection to Richard. A modest trust, I said after careful consideration. Nothing close to what he likely expects, but enough to demonstrate that I never intended to disinherit him completely. The bulk of what doesn't go to the foundation will remain under my control. For living expenses and discretionary spending. Bernard nodded, making notes. Are you planning to tell him about any of this? Not yet, I replied. For now, I need space to implement these changes without defending or explaining them. That afternoon, I visited my local bank branch, where I had been a customer for over 40 years. Mrs. Patel, the branch manager, greeted me warmly. Mrs. Winters, what a lovely surprise. How can I help you today? I'd like to close my accounts, I said, watching her expression shift from welcome to concern. Is there a problem with our service? If there's anything we've done— Nothing like that, I assured her. Your bank has served me well for decades. But I'm consolidating my finances with Atlantic Trust, where my investment accounts are held. Mrs. Patel's eyebrows rose slightly. Most people in town knew me as the retired school teacher who lived carefully within her modest pension. The mention of investment accounts at Atlantic Trust, a wealth management firm known for its high minimum balance requirements, clearly surprised her. I see, she said, recovering quickly. We'll certainly be sorry to lose you as a customer, Mrs. Winters. May I ask what prompted this change after so many years? I considered the question, then decided on honesty. I'm simplifying my financial management as I enter this new phase of life. Having everything under one roof makes sense for me now. As Mrs. Patel processed the paperwork to transfer my accounts, I felt a strange mixture of liberation and vulnerability. This small action, consolidating my modest checking and savings, accounts with my much larger investment portfolio, was another step toward financial transparency. For years, I had deliberately maintained separate financial worlds, keeping my wealth hidden even from those who handled my day-to-day banking. Each of these small changes chipped away at the carefully constructed facade I had maintained for decades. Outside the bank, I checked my phone to find 3 missed calls from James and a text message. Mom, we need to talk. This silent treatment is childish and concerning. I slipped the phone back into my purse without responding. James had defined any boundary setting on my part as evidence of emotional instability for years. His assessment no longer concerned me. At home, I found a message from Christine Weber, the attorney Bernard had recommended to help establish the foundation. She had arranged a meeting with the Board of Education to discuss potential partnership opportunities for the scholarship program. As I prepared for this meeting, selecting appropriate attire from my limited wardrobe, I realized how thoroughly I had constrained even my personal appearance to match my supposed financial circumstances. My clothes were neat, clean, and well-maintained, but deliberately unremarkable. Nothing that might suggest disposable income or indulgence. The next morning, on impulse, I visited Elaine's boutique, an upscale clothing store I had walked past for years without entering. Inside, I approached a stylish saleswoman. I need a complete wardrobe update, I said, surprising myself with my directness. professional attire, casual wear, and perhaps something for special occasions. The woman, Margot, according to her name tag, looked momentarily startled by my request. I knew what she saw. A 70-year-old woman in sensible shoes and a dated cardigan asking for a comprehensive wardrobe refresh. Of course, she said, professional smile firmly in place. Do you have a particular budget in mind? Quality over quantity, I replied. I'm particularly interested in classic pieces that will last. For the next 2 hours, Margot helped me select clothing that flattered my figure and projected the confidence I now felt internally. I chose tailored blazers in rich jewel tones, well-cut trousers, silk blouses, and cashmere sweaters. For the first time in decades, I selected items based solely on whether I truly liked them, without calculating their cost against my fabricated financial constraints. When Margot totaled my purchases, the amount would have represented a significant portion of what most people believed was my monthly pension. I handed over my credit card without hesitation. Would you like these delivered? Margot asked as she processed the payment. Yes, please, I replied, providing my address. Winters, she repeated as she entered it into the system. On Maple Street, the house with the major renovation underway? I nodded, surprised by her recognition. My brother works for Porter Design, she explained. He mentioned a substantial project for an older client on Maple. Small town, she added with a smile. Indeed, the renovations had only begun days ago, but already they were becoming topic of local conversation. This, too, was new territory, allowing myself to be visible, to occupy space, to make changes that others would notice and discuss. On my way home, I stopped at the local coffee shop for a cappuccino, another small luxury I had generally denied, myself choosing regular coffee instead to maintain my image of careful frugality. The barista, a young woman with bright blue hair and multiple piercings, smiled in recognition. Mrs. Winters, good to see you. The usual? Actually, I said, studying the menu board, I'd like to try a cappuccino today, and perhaps one of those almond croissants. She seemed momentarily surprised by the deviation from my standard order, but quickly recovered. Feeling adventurous today? Something like that, I replied with a smile. As I waited for my order, I noticed a familiar figure entering the cafe, Elizabeth Chen, the current principal of Jefferson Elementary, where I had taught for over 3 decades before retirement. Eleanor, she exclaimed, approaching with a warm smile. I was just thinking about you. Do you have a moment to chat? We settled at a small table by the window, Elizabeth with her chai latte, and I with my cappuccino and croissant. I heard the most interesting news yesterday, she began, adding sugar to her tea. Apparently, there's a new educational foundation being established in town, named after Richard. I thought perhaps you might know something about it. I hesitated, not yet prepared for this conversation, but unwilling to be dishonest with Elizabeth, who had always been a supportive colleague and had maintained our friendship after my retirement. Yes, I acknowledged. I'm establishing the foundation to provide scholarships and resources for aspiring teachers. Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly. That's wonderful, Eleanor, but I'm a bit surprised. Such an undertaking requires substantial funding. This was the moment. The first time I would acknowledge my financial reality to someone who had known me professionally for decades. I took a deep breath. I've been investing successfully for many years, I said simply. The foundation will be well funded. To her credit, Elizabeth didn't express shock or disbelief. She simply nodded thoughtfully. Richard would be so proud. He always believed in investing in future educators. After a pause, she added, The timing is perfect, actually. The district is facing significant challenges attracting qualified teachers, especially in underserved schools. Our conversation shifted to the state of education in our community and potential ways the foundation might address critical needs. Not once did Elizabeth question how a retired teacher on a pension could fund such initiatives. She simply accepted this new information about me and moved forward. As we parted ways, Elizabeth hugged me warmly. "I'm delighted you're doing this, Eleanor. And if you're looking for board members who understand local educational needs, I'd be honored to be considered." "That's exactly the expertise we need," I replied, genuinely pleased by her offer. "I'll have Christine Weber contact you about the position." Walking home in the gentle afternoon sunshine, I felt a curious lightness. Each small step, consolidating my accounts, updating my wardrobe, acknowledging my foundation publicly, moved me further from the constrained identity I had maintained for so long. These changes weren't just external, but represented a fundamental shift in how I presented myself to the world. That evening, as I reviewed architectural plans for the kitchen renovation, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find James standing on my porch, his expression a mixture of frustration and concern. "Mom," he said without preamble, "what's going on? You haven't returned my calls, and now I hear you're doing major renovations? Where are you getting the money for all this?" I regarded my son calmly, noticing the worry lines creasing his forehead, the tension in his shoulders. For a moment, I almost retreated into my habitual pattern, explaining, justifying, minimizing myself to ease his concerns. But those days were behind me. "Hello, James," I said evenly. "Yes, I'm making some improvements to the house. Would you like to come in?" He stepped inside, then stopped abruptly, staring at the interior. The living room furniture had been moved to accommodate the coming renovations, and paint samples in rich, bold colors adorned several walls. Design plans and material samples covered the dining table. "What is all this?" he demanded. "You can't afford these kinds of changes on your pension. Are you taking out loans? Depleting your savings?" This is exactly what I was worried about. I could have explained. I could have revealed everything, my investments, the foundation, the truth about my financial situation. But I realized that James wasn't ready to hear it. More importantly, I wasn't ready to defend or justify my decisions to someone who had so recently attempted to seize control of my life. "I appreciate your concern," I said instead, maintaining my composure. "But my financial decisions are not open for discussion right now." "Not open for, Mom, this is serious. If you're making impulsive financial decisions, it only confirms what I've been worried about." "There's nothing impulsive about these changes," I assured him. "They're carefully considered and well within my means." James ran a hand through his hair in obvious frustration. "I don't understand where this resistance is coming from. I'm trying to help you." "No, James," I said gently but firmly. "You're trying to control me. There's a significant difference." His face flushed. "That's unfair. Everything I've suggested is for your protection and security." "Perhaps that's what you believe," I acknowledged, "but your approach assumes incompetence on my part, which I find both inaccurate and disrespectful." "So you're just going to shut me out? After everything I've tried to do for you?" The question hung between us, loaded with unspoken expectations and assumptions. In that moment, I saw clearly the narrative James had constructed. His aging mother, financially naive and increasingly vulnerable, stubbornly rejecting his benevolent guidance. He genuinely couldn't conceptualize an alternative reality where I might be fully capable of managing my own affairs, possibly even more capably than he managed his. "I'm not shutting you out," I said after a thoughtful pause. "I'm establishing boundaries. When you're ready to engage with me as an autonomous adult rather than a problem to be managed, we can have a different conversation." James stared at me, clearly struggling to reconcile this assertive woman with the accommodating mother he had known. Without another word, he turned and left, the door closing firmly behind him. As I watched through the window while he drove away, I felt not triumph, but a complex mixture of sadness and resolve. This wilderness I was navigating, this space between my old self-effacing identity and my emerging authentic self, was lonely and disorienting at times. But it was also necessary, not just for my own dignity, but ultimately for the possibility of a healthier relationship with my son. I returned to my architectural plans, making notes on the kitchen design I preferred. Tomorrow would bring more decisions, more steps into unfamiliar territory. But for tonight, I was content knowing that each choice, each boundary established, moved me closer to the life I had earned but never fully claimed. 3 weeks into my home renovations, I received an unexpected invitation from Christine Weber, the attorney handling the foundation establishment. "We're hosting a small gathering for potential board members and community partners next Thursday," she explained over the phone. "Given that this is your vision, it would be meaningful to have you there to share the foundation's mission personally." The suggestion immediately triggered anxiety. For decades, I had deliberately avoided spotlights, carefully maintained a modest public persona, and deflected attention from my financial acumen. The thought of standing before a room of community leaders, openly discussing the multi-million-dollar foundation I was establishing, felt like stepping off a cliff without knowing the distance to the ground. "I'm not certain that's necessary," I hedged. "You're more than capable of presenting the foundation's objectives." "Eleanor," Christine said gently, "this foundation bears your husband's name and represents your vision for educational equity. The personal element matters. These potential board members and partners aren't just investing in an abstract concept, they're aligning themselves with your values and commitment." After a thoughtful pause, she added, "May I speak frankly?" "Please do." "I understand from Bernard that privacy has been important to you, but foundations aren't built in shadows. They thrive through relationships, shared purpose, and transparent leadership. If you truly want this foundation to create lasting change, it needs a human center, and that's you." Her words resonated uncomfortably. I had envisioned funding the foundation generously while remaining in the background, perhaps listed as founder, but not actively engaged in its public face. Christine was suggesting something different: visible leadership, personal advocacy, genuine community engagement. "I'll consider it," I said finally. After our call ended, I sat in my garden, watching butterflies drift between newly planted perennials. Christine's suggestion had exposed another layer of my self-imposed limitations. Even as I reclaimed my financial autonomy and began living more authentically, I still instinctively shied away from public acknowledgement of my capabilities and contributions. Why? The question demanded honest examination. Fear of judgment? Certainly. Concern that people would question how a schoolteacher had accumulated such wealth, perhaps even suspect unethical sources. But deeper than that lurked the insidious belief that remaining invisible was somehow virtuous, that seeking recognition was unseemly, especially for a woman of my generation. My phone chimed with a text from Sarah. "Lunch tomorrow? I want to hear about the renovations." Sarah had been my steadfast friend through decades of teaching together, sharing classroom struggles and celebrating small victories. Yet, until recently, I had never shared my financial reality with her. Our friendship had been genuine but incomplete, limited by my own reluctance to be fully known. We met at Riverside Cafe, a charming establishment overlooking the water. Sarah arrived first, waving from a table on the patio. As I approached, her eyes widened slightly. "Ellie, you look wonderful." She gestured to my new outfit, a tailored linen blazer over a silk shell, paired with well-cut trousers. "I don't think I've ever seen you in that color before. It suits you perfectly." "Thank you," I replied, settling into my chair. "I've been making some changes." "So, I've heard." Sarah's eyes twinkled with interest. "The whole town is buzzing about your home renovation. Adrian Porter doesn't typically work with residential clients in our area unless the budget exceeds 6 figures. I smiled, no longer uncomfortable with this acknowledgement of my financial capacity. The house needed updating. I decided it was time to create a space that truly reflects who I am. "And who is that exactly?" Sarah asked, her tone gentle but direct. "Because the Eleanor I've known for 30 years has darned the same sweaters, rather than replace them and brought homemade lunches to save money." The question deserved a thoughtful response. "That Eleanor was real," I said after a moment. "The values of responsibility and non-materialism are authentic, but the financial constraints were largely self-imposed." Our conversation paused as the server took our orders. When we were alone again, Sarah leaned forward. "Why maintain that pretense for so long, even with me?" "It began with protecting James from developing entitlement or expecting an easy life," I explained. "After Richard died, I wanted to ensure our son valued education and hard work rather than viewing wealth as a safety net. But over time, the pretense became a habit, then an identity. Each year, it became harder to imagine revealing the truth." Sarah nodded slowly. "And now, what's changed?" "James tried to take control of my finances, convinced I was cognitively declining and financially vulnerable. The irony was too stark to ignore. I've managed millions successfully for decades. Yet my own son sees only an incompetent old woman. So these changes are about proving something to James?" I considered this seriously. Initially, perhaps there was an element of that. But I've realized this transformation isn't about James at all. It's about finally living authentically after decades of unnecessary constraint. Sarah reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Well, I think it's wonderful. And for what it's worth, I always sensed there was more to you than you revealed. No one manages money as carefully as you did without developing genuine expertise." After lunch, Sarah accompanied me to a meeting at the community center, where I had arranged to discuss potential programming the foundation might support. Walking together through the building's lobby, we encountered Margaret Wilson, the center's director. "Mrs. Winters," Margaret exclaimed, extending her hand. "And Sarah, too. Wonderful. I was just about to call you. We received the foundation's letter of intent this morning." "I hope the proposed collaboration looks promising," I replied. "Promising?" Margaret's enthusiasm bubbled over. "It's transformative. The after-school teacher mentorship program you're suggesting could address our most critical needs." As Margaret led us to her office, describing the impact such programming could have on underserved students, I noticed how differently she engaged with me. For years, I had volunteered at the center, quietly helping with children's reading programs. Margaret had always been respectful but somewhat distant. Now, seeing me as a potential major donor, her energy and attention had shifted noticeably. This was the double-edged reality of wealth. It opened doors and commanded attention, but it also called into question whether that respect was for me as a person or merely for the resources I controlled. The thought was both sobering and instructive. During our meeting, I made a point of redirecting Margaret's focus from funding amounts to programmatic substance. "The Foundation's mission is educational equity," I emphasized. "Financial support is important, but equally valuable is designing initiatives with sustainable impact." By meeting's end, we had outlined a promising collaboration focused on supporting new teachers in under-resourced schools, a program that honored Richard's lifelong commitment to mentoring educators. As we prepared to leave, Margaret handed me an invitation. "The center's annual fundraising gala is next month," she explained. "We'd be honored to have you attend as our special guest. Perhaps you might even say a few words about the Foundation's vision?" Once again, I faced the invitation to step forward publicly rather than remaining in the background. This time, my hesitation was briefer. "I'd be pleased to attend," I replied. "And yes, I'm happy to speak about the Foundation." As Sarah and I walked back to our cars, she chuckled softly. Margaret nearly fell over herself accommodating the new you. Does that bother you? People suddenly paying attention when they discover you have resources? It's revealing, I acknowledged, but not entirely surprising. What matters is maintaining perspective about which relationships are genuine and which are transactional. Like your relationship with James? Sarah asked gently. The question struck a tender spot. I honestly don't know anymore, I admitted. I want to believe his concern, however misplaced, comes from genuine care. But I can't ignore how quickly he moved to take control, how readily he dismissed my autonomy. Have you spoken since he confronted you about the renovations? He's called several times. I've returned one call, keeping the conversation brief and centered on the girls. I sighed. I'm not avoiding him permanently, Sarah. I'm just creating space to establish my new boundaries before attempting to rebuild our relationship. That evening, I received an unexpected email from Elizabeth Chen, the school principal I had encountered at the coffee shop. The subject line read simply, an idea. Elizabeth explained that she had been thinking about our conversation regarding the foundation. Jefferson Elementary had an unused classroom that could potentially be converted into a teacher resource center, a space where educators could access professional development materials, collaborative planning areas, and specialized teaching resources often unavailable in public school budgets. The district lacks funds for such an initiative, she wrote. But if the foundation were interested in sponsoring the space, I believe it could become a model for supporting teacher excellence throughout the region. As I read her thoughtful proposal, complete with preliminary budget estimates and implementation timeline, I felt a surge of excitement. This was exactly the kind of practical, high-impact initiative Richard would have championed. I immediately forwarded the email to Christine with my enthusiastic endorsement. The next morning, I met with Bernard to review the finalized foundation documents. The Richard Winters Educational Foundation would launch with an initial endowment of $2 million, a substantial commitment that would enable meaningful programming while retaining sufficient personal assets for my own needs and the educational trusts established for my granddaughters. Everything is in order, Bernard confirmed, closing the folder. Once you sign, we can proceed with the public announcement and formal establishment. I took the pen he offered, but paused before signing. Bernard, I've been invited to speak about the foundation at 2 upcoming events. I find I'm rather nervous about stepping into such a public role after decades of deliberate privacy. Bernard smiled encouragingly. It's a significant shift, certainly. But consider this. For years, you've managed millions with exceptional skill while allowing others, including your son, to underestimate your capabilities. Perhaps it's time not just to live authentically in private, but to be recognized for your genuine expertise. It feels uncomfortably like seeking attention, I admitted. Or like claiming space you've earned, he countered gently. There's a profound difference between boastfulness and honest self-representation. His perspective resonated deeply. Throughout my life, I had conflated visibility with vanity, public acknowledgement with improper pride. This conflation had served as yet another constraint, another way I had limited myself unnecessarily. I signed the foundation documents with a steady hand, then looked up at Bernard. I'd like your help preparing for these speaking engagements. I want to represent the foundation effectively. With pleasure, he replied, though I suspect you'll find you have more to offer than you realize. That afternoon, I attended the first gathering of potential foundation board members at Christine's office. As I entered the conference room, conversation paused briefly as 8 distinguished community members, educational administrators, business leaders, and nonprofit directors turned to acknowledge my arrival. Christine made introductions, describing me as the visionary founder whose commitment to educational equity has made this initiative possible. As I took my seat at the head of the table, I felt a momentary impulse to deflect the description, to minimize my contribution as I had done reflexively for so long. Instead, I simply said, "Thank you for being here." The foundation honors my late husband's belief that education is the most powerful tool for creating positive change. I'm eager to hear your perspectives on how we can best serve that mission. For the next 2 hours, I listened attentively as these experienced leaders discussed potential programs, governance structures, and assessment metrics. When appropriate, I contributed insights and asked clarifying questions. Not once did anyone express surprise at my financial acumen or question my authority to lead this initiative. They engaged with me as a peer, a respected colleague bringing valuable perspective to our shared endeavor. As the meeting concluded, Dr. Martin Reynolds, a retired superintendent who had agreed to chair the board, approached me with evident enthusiasm. "Mrs. Winters, I've attended countless foundation meetings over my career, but rarely have I encountered one with such clear purpose and thoughtful leadership. You've assembled an exceptional team, and your vision provides meaningful direction without constraining innovation. I'm honored to be part of this endeavor." His sincere acknowledgement touched me deeply. Not because I needed validation, but because it represented acceptance of my authentic self in a public context, something I had rarely experienced. That evening, I received a text message from an unknown number. "Grandma, it's Emma. Can we talk? I got a new phone Mom and Dad don't know about." Emma, my 16-year-old granddaughter, had always been independent-minded and perceptive. That she would establish a private communication channel suggested something significant was motivating her. I called immediately. "Emma, is everything all right?" "I think so," she replied, her voice slightly tentative. "But things are weird at home. Dad's been super stressed and keeps talking about you with Mom when they think we're not listening. Something about money and you acting strange." My heart sank. I had hoped to shield my granddaughters from the tension between James and me, but clearly they were aware something was amiss. "Your father and I have different perspectives on some matters right now," I said carefully, "but that doesn't change how much I love you and your sister. Dad said you're spending tons of money on house renovations and might be getting confused about finances." Emma's directness was refreshing, if uncomfortable. "But that doesn't sound like you at all." "No, it doesn't," I agreed. "The truth is more complicated, Emma. I've made some decisions your father doesn't understand yet." "Can I come see you? The renovations sound amazing. And I miss you. Dad hasn't taken us to visit in weeks." The request brought both joy and concern. I wanted nothing more than to maintain my relationship with my granddaughters, but I was wary of creating further tension with James. "I'd love that," I said sincerely. "But let's be transparent. Text your parents that you'd like to visit, and I'll speak with your father to make proper arrangements." After our call ended, I sent James a message. "Emma has expressed interest in seeing the renovations. I'd welcome a visit from both girls this weekend if that works for your family." His response came quickly. "Fine. I'll drop them Saturday at 11. They need to be back by 4 for a commitment." Brief and businesslike, but at least he was willing to facilitate the visit. It was a small opening, a tiny bridge across the growing divide between us. Whether that bridge could eventually support the weight of genuine reconciliation remained to be seen. But for now, I was content with this modest connection. As I prepared for bed that evening, I reflected on the day's events, signing the foundation, documents, meeting with the board, connecting with Emma. Each interaction represented a step further into my emerging authentic life, a life where I was visible, engaged, and acknowledged for my genuine capabilities, rather than diminished by others' limited perceptions. This new territory was still unfamiliar, still occasionally uncomfortable. But with each passing day, I found myself more confident navigating it, more certain that the path forward, however challenging, was infinitely preferable to returning to self-imposed constraints and others' diminished expectations. The morning of my granddaughter's visit dawned bright and clear. Contractors had temporarily paused work for the weekend, leaving the house in a state of organized transition. The living room had been completely refreshed with rich navy walls, elegant new furnishings, and carefully curated artwork. The kitchen renovation was still underway, but the dining room had been transformed into a comfortable temporary eating space with a new table and chairs that would eventually move to the sunroom. I had spent the previous evening preparing for the visit, baking the girls' favorite lemon cookies and assembling ingredients for our traditional pizza-making lunch. Though Emma had initiated contact, I knew that 14-year-old Lily would need equal attention and reassurance. At precisely 11 a.m., I heard a car in the driveway. Looking through the window, I saw James's sedan pull up. He remained behind the wheel as Emma and Lily emerged, each carrying a small backpack. The girls waved enthusiastically when they spotted me at the window, but James merely nodded curtly before driving away. "Grandma!" Lily exclaimed as I opened the door, rushing forward for a hug. "You look different. Your hair is so pretty." I touched my newly styled silver bob self-consciously. My updated appearance, professional hairstyle, subtle makeup, elegant clothing was yet another aspect of my transformation that would be immediately noticeable to observant family members. "Thank you, sweetheart," I replied, embracing her warmly before turning to hug Emma. I decided it was time for a change. "More than just your hair," Emma observed astutely as she entered the house, her eyes widening at the renovated living room. Wow, Dad wasn't exaggerating about the renovations. This is amazing. I gave them a tour of the completed areas, explaining the plans for spaces still under construction. The girls responded with genuine enthusiasm, asking thoughtful questions about design choices and offering their own perspectives. "My room too?" Lily asked hopefully, referring to the guest bedroom she had always used during overnight visits. "Of course," I assured her. "I've ordered new furniture, but I'd like your input on colors and decor. It's your space when you're here, after all." In the kitchen, we began our pizza-making tradition, rolling out dough and arranging toppings. As we worked, the girls shared updates about school, friends, and activities. The conversation flowed naturally until Emma broached the subject that clearly weighed on both their minds. "Dad says you're acting weird about money," she stated bluntly, sprinkling cheese on her pizza. "Is that why he's been so tense lately?" I carefully considered my response, wanting to be truthful without disparaging their father. "Your dad and I have different perspectives on financial management, especially regarding my capabilities at this stage of life." "Because you're old?" Lily asked with characteristic directness. I smiled gently. "That's part of it. Your father believes that at 70 I might need help managing my finances." I disagree. "But you taught economics before you switched to 3rd grade, Emma pointed out, frowning. "Dad knows that, right?" "Yes, but that was many years ago," I acknowledged. "And to be fair, I've never discussed financial matters much with your father. That's partially my responsibility." As our pizzas baked, the conversation continued, with the girls asking increasingly perceptive questions. I navigated each carefully, balancing honesty with age-appropriate explanations and respect for their relationship with their father. "Are you rich now, Grandma?" Lily asked suddenly. "Taylor's grandma won the lottery and bought a Ferrari." The question made me laugh despite its complexity. "No Ferraris for me," I assured her. "But I'm more financially comfortable than I've let people believe. I made good investments over many years." "So Dad is worried for nothing?" Emma pressed. "Your father's concern comes from a place of love," I said diplomatically. "He wants to ensure I'm taken care of. We just disagree about what that should look like." After lunch, we spent the afternoon playing board games and discussing their upcoming school year. The time passed quickly, and before I knew it, James's car was pulling into the driveway again. Do we have to go? Lily asked, reluctant to end our visit. Your father mentioned you have a commitment this afternoon, I reminded her gently. But we'll arrange another visit soon, perhaps an overnight stay once your room is finished. The girls gathered their belongings and hugged me goodbye. As they headed toward the door, Emma hung back momentarily. Grandma, she whispered, I think what you're doing is awesome. Don't let Dad make you feel bad about it. Her support touched me deeply. Thank you, sweetheart. And remember, your father loves you very much. We're just working through some adult disagreements. I walked the girls to the car, where James waited without exiting. Through the open passenger window, I said, Thank you for bringing them, James. We had a lovely visit. He nodded stiffly. They've been asking to see you. I didn't want to put them in the middle of our situation. I appreciate that, I replied sincerely. They're wonderful girls, James. You and Veronica have raised them well. A flicker of something, perhaps surprise at the compliment or a momentary softening, crossed his face before he shifted the car into reverse. We'll be in touch about their next visit. As I watched them drive away, I felt both warmth from the successful reconnection with my granddaughters and sadness at the continuing strain with my son. The girls' visit had been a bright spot in an otherwise challenging period of transition. The following Monday morning, I received an unexpected call from my former neighbor, Dorothy Kendall. Though I had moved away from our old neighborhood 15 years earlier, Dorothy and I had maintained a casual friendship, occasionally meeting for coffee or sending holiday cards. Eleanor, she began without preamble, I just had the most uncomfortable conversation with James. He called asking if I'd noticed any changes in your behavior recently, specifically mentioning memory problems or confusion. He seemed quite concerned about your decision-making. My stomach tightened. I see, I said carefully. And what did you tell him? That he was barking up the wrong tree, Dorothy replied firmly. I told him you've always been sharp as a tack and more financially savvy than most people half your age. Then I asked why he was questioning your competence behind your back instead of having an honest conversation with you. Her straightforward defense warmed me, but James's actions were deeply troubling. Thank you, Dorothy. I appreciate your candor with him. He mentioned something about renovations and financial concerns, she continued. Said you might be making impulsive decisions due to cognitive changes. Eleanor, what's really going on? I sighed, realizing that James's campaign extended beyond our immediate family circle. I'm making some changes in my life, updates to my home, establishing an educational foundation, living more in alignment with my actual financial situation, rather than the modest image I've maintained for years. James finds these changes concerning, rather than understanding they represent deliberate choices. Ah, Dorothy said knowingly. My elderly parent must be losing it because they're making decisions I don't understand syndrome. My daughter went through a phase like that when I decided to sell the family home and move to the condo. Couldn't fathom that I might know what I wanted better than she did. After ending the call with Dorothy, I sat in troubled reflection. James wasn't simply disagreeing with my choices. He was actively seeking allies to validate his concerns about my competence. This escalation suggested he might be considering more formal interventions, perhaps even legal measures to challenge my autonomy. That afternoon, I contacted Diane Winters, Richard's niece and a respected geriatric psychiatrist practicing in a neighboring state. Though we weren't especially close, we had maintained contact through the years, and I trusted her professional integrity. I need a comprehensive cognitive assessment, I explained after briefly describing the situation with James. Not because I believe there's any issue, but because I want official documentation of my cognitive status in case questions arise. This sounds challenging, Eleanor, Diane said sympathetically. I'm happy to arrange an assessment with a colleague here, someone with no personal connection to either of you. whose evaluation would be unquestionably objective. The following week, I traveled to meet with Dr. Lawrence Phillips, a neuropsychologist recommended by Diane. For 4 hours, he administered a battery of tests assessing memory, reasoning, judgment, problem-solving, and other cognitive functions. The process was exhausting but necessary. "Mrs. Winters," Dr. Phillips said as we concluded, "based on my preliminary observations, your cognitive functions appear entirely normal for someone of your age, and in several areas, notably above average. You'll receive my full written assessment within 2 weeks." This external validation provided practical reassurance, but it saddened me that such verification was necessary. The fact that my son's doubts about my capabilities had driven me to seek professional assessment reflected the profound rupture in our relationship. Upon returning home, I found an envelope from Bernard containing preliminary press materials for the Foundation's public announcement, scheduled for the following month. The press release described me as a lifelong educator and investment strategist, whose financial acumen had created the opportunity to establish this significant endowment. Reading these words, this public acknowledgement of capabilities, I had deliberately concealed for decades, I felt a complex mixture of vulnerability and pride. The announcement would make explicit what had previously been private, placing me in a spotlight I had long avoided. It would also directly contradict the narrative James had constructed about his financially naive, potentially cognitively impaired mother. That evening, as I was reviewing Foundation documents, my doorbell rang. Opening it, I found Veronica standing on my porch, her expression tense but determined. "Eleanor," she said formally, "may I come in? There are some matters we need to discuss." I invited her inside, noting her barely concealed surprise at the renovated interior. "Would you like some tea?" I offered, leading her to the living room. "No, thank you. This isn't a social call." She settled stiffly onto the sofa, placing her designer handbag beside her. "James is concerned, Eleanor. Deeply concerned. And frankly, so am I." "About my cognitive health or my financial decisions?" I asked directly. "Both are connected," she replied. These dramatic changes, expensive renovations, new clothing, suddenly establishing some sort of foundation, they're not consistent with your established patterns. Significant personality and behavior changes can indicate underlying cognitive issues. Her clinical tone, likely rehearsed, might have intimidated me in the past. Now I simply felt sad at her willingness to pathologize my autonomy. Or they could indicate a decision to live more authentically after years of self-imposed constraints. I countered gently. "Not all change reflects decline, Veronica." She pursed her lips. "James has consulted with Dr. Mercer. He believes a formal cognitive assessment would be appropriate given these concerning changes." "I've already had one," I informed her, watching surprise flash across her face. "A comprehensive neuropsychological evaluation with Dr. Lawrence Phillips last week. His preliminary finding was that my cognitive functions are entirely normal, above average in several areas, in fact. You and James will be welcome to review the full assessment when it arrives." This information clearly disrupted her prepared approach. She hesitated before continuing. "That's good to hear. But it doesn't address the financial concerns. These renovations must be putting significant strain on your limited resources." "My resources," I said carefully, "are not as limited as you and James have assumed." Veronica's expression shifted from concern to confusion. "What exactly does that mean, Eleanor?" I considered how much to reveal. While my relationship with James required eventual full disclosure, I wasn't yet ready for that conversation, especially not with Veronica as intermediary. "It means I've made sound financial decisions throughout my life," I replied. "Decisions that allow me to undertake these renovations and establish the foundation without financial strain." "You're being deliberately vague," she accused. "If you're in some sort of financial trouble and too proud to admit it—" "I'm not in financial trouble, Veronica. Quite the opposite." I maintained a calm, measured tone despite her growing frustration. "What troubles me is that neither you nor James has considered the possibility that I might be fully capable of managing my own affairs." "Because this behavior isn't like you," she exclaimed. "For 20 years, you've lived modestly on your teacher's pension. You've darned socks. Instead of buying new ones, you've declined family vacations citing budget constraints. Now suddenly you're renovating your entire home and starting a foundation? It doesn't make sense unless something has changed." "Something has changed," I acknowledged. "Me. My willingness to continue living below my means to maintain an image that no longer serves its purpose." Veronica stared at me, clearly struggling to reconcile this assertion with her long-held assumptions about my financial situation. "Are you saying you've had additional resources all this time? That you've deliberately misled us?" "I've been private about my finances," I corrected gently. "That's not the same as misleading. I made choices about how to live and what to prioritize, choices that reflected my values." "James deserved to know," she insisted, her voice hardening. "He's your son. He's been worried about your financial security for years, making plans to support you when necessary. If you've been secretly wealthy all this time—" "Not secretly wealthy," I interrupted. "Privately successful in my investments. There's a distinction that matters." The conversation continued in circles, with Veronica alternating between disbelief, accusation, and attempts to extract specific financial details I wasn't yet prepared to disclose. Throughout, I maintained a calm, respectful demeanor while firmly establishing my boundaries. Finally, clearly frustrated by her inability to shake my resolve, Veronica stood to leave. "James will want to discuss this directly. This situation isn't resolved, Eleanor. I welcome an honest conversation with my son whenever he's ready," I replied, walking her to the door. "But that conversation must begin with mutual respect and recognition of my autonomy." After she left, I poured myself a small glass of wine and settled onto my new sofa, contemplating the escalating resistance to my transformation. James and Veronica's inability to reconcile my emerging authentic self with their long-held perceptions revealed how thoroughly I had constrained myself to meet others' expectations and assumptions. Their resistance, while painful, couldn't deter me from the path I had chosen. Each challenge, whether James's behind-the-scenes questioning of my competence or Veronica's direct confrontation, only strengthened my resolve to live truthfully according to my own values and capabilities. The foundation announcement would soon make my financial reality public knowledge. The cognitive assessment would document my mental competence. The renovations would create a home that reflected my authentic self, rather than a deliberately diminished version crafted to meet others' expectations. These external changes were significant, but the internal transformation was more profound, a growing confidence in my right to define myself rather than accepting others' limited perceptions. That confidence would be tested repeatedly in the coming weeks, but it was rooted in something unassailable: the truth of who I was and what I had accomplished. As I sipped my wine and watched the sunset through my new windows, I felt not anger at James and Veronica's resistance, but a deep certainty that this challenging period was both necessary and ultimately healing. The path to authentic living wasn't meant to be smooth or comfortable, especially when it disrupted others' convenient narratives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight I could rest in the knowledge that I was finally becoming whole, integrating. The capable financial strategist, the dedicated educator, the loving grandmother, and the emerging public leader into a single, authentic identity that no one else's limitations could diminish. The official report from Dr. Phillips arrived by certified mail 2 weeks after my evaluation. As expected, It documented excellent cognitive function across all assessed domains and specifically noted that my financial reasoning and judgment capabilities are intact and robust. I forwarded copies to Bernard for safekeeping and to Christine Weber for the Foundation's records, relieved to have official documentation countering any potential claims of incapacity. With this protective measure in place, I turned my attention to preparing for the Foundation's public announcement. Christine had arranged a formal launch event at the Grand Hotel downtown, inviting educational leaders, potential partners, and local media. The prospect of standing before this audience, publicly claiming my financial accomplishments and philanthropic vision, still triggered occasional anxiety, despite my growing comfort with visibility. 3 days before the event, I received an unexpected email from Patricia Blackwell, the name immediately triggering a flood of memories. Patricia had been my mentor at Jefferson Elementary when I began teaching 45 years earlier. Though nearly 20 years my senior, she had taken me under her wing, guiding me through those challenging early years with wisdom and patience. After retirement, she had moved to Arizona to be near her daughter's family, and our communication had gradually dwindled to occasional holiday cards. "Dear Eleanor," her message began, "forgive this out-of-the-blue contact after so long. I recently saw your name mentioned in connection with an educational foundation being established in our hometown. Is this the same Eleanor Winters who once decorated her classroom with handmade paper flowers because the school couldn't afford proper educational materials? If so, I find myself both delighted and curious about the journey that has led to this new chapter. I'll be visiting my niece in Burlington next week and would love to reconnect if you're available." The timing seemed almost providential. Here was someone who had known me at the beginning of my teaching career, who had shaped my professional identity long before I had constructed careful facades around my financial capabilities. I responded immediately, suggesting lunch the following day at Riverside Cafe. Patricia arrived precisely on time, her silver hair elegantly styled, her posture still remarkably straight despite her 90 years. I would have recognized her anywhere, those keen blue eyes and warm smile unchanged by the decades since we had last met. "Eleanor Winters," she exclaimed, embracing me warmly. "Still looking like you could handle a classroom of 33rd graders without breaking a sweat." I laughed, returning her embrace. "And you still look like you could silence a faculty meeting with a single raised eyebrow." Once seated, Patricia studied me thoughtfully. "You look well, Eleanor. Different somehow. There's a confidence about you that's new." "Life has taken some unexpected turns recently," I acknowledged. "I'm learning to shed old constraints and live more authentically." "Tell me everything," she encouraged. "Start." "With this foundation I've heard about. The Richard Winters Educational Foundation, correct? Named for your late husband?" Over lunch, I shared the outline of recent events: James's attempt to take control of my finances, my decision to stop, hiding my financial success, the establishment of the foundation, and the ongoing tensions with my son. Patricia listened attentively, asking occasional clarifying questions, but mostly allowing me to tell my story without interruption. "So this financial acumen," she said when I had finished, "this investment skill that's funded your foundation, you've had this capability all along? Even back when you were teaching alongside me?" "In developing form, yes," I confirmed. "Richard and I began investing together early in our marriage. After his death, I continued learning and applying what I'd learned, gradually building our modest inheritance into something substantial." Patricia nodded thoughtfully. "I always sensed there was more to you than met the eye, Eleanor. You had a precision about you, an attention to detail that extended beyond your teaching methods. I remember how meticulously you tracked classroom expenses, how carefully you allocated even the smallest resources." "You noticed that?" I was surprised by her observation of traits I had believed were visible only in my private financial management. "Of course. Good mentors see the whole person, not just the professional facade." She smiled warmly. What fascinates me is why you kept this capability hidden for so long. You were clearly proud of your teaching accomplishments. Why not your financial success as well? The question deserved thoughtful consideration. Initially, it was about protecting James from developing entitlement, I explained. After Richard died, I wanted to ensure our son valued education and hard work. But over time, I think it became something more complex, almost as if I believed my financial capabilities somehow diminished or contradicted my identity as an educator. As if you couldn't be both a dedicated teacher and a skilled investor, Patricia suggested. Exactly. As if acknowledging financial success might somehow suggest I valued money over education, when in reality, I saw financial growth as a means to eventually support educational causes. Patricia considered this, stirring her tea thoughtfully. Women of our generation were taught to diminish ourselves in so many ways, weren't we? To make ourselves smaller, less threatening, less complete. To compartmentalize our capabilities, rather than integrate them into a whole identity. Her perspective resonated deeply. I never thought of it that way, but yes, there was always an unspoken message that being too capable in too many domains was somehow inappropriate for a woman. Particularly financial domains, Patricia added. Those belonged to men, or so we were told. A woman with financial acumen was suspect, either unfeminine or somehow morally compromised. Richard never felt that way, I noted. He encouraged my interest in investing, saw it as an extension of my analytical abilities rather than some contradiction of my nurturing nature. He sounds like a remarkable man, Patricia smiled, which makes your foundation a fitting tribute. Tell me more about your vision for it. For the next hour, I outlined the educational initiatives we were developing: the Teacher Resource Center at Jefferson Elementary, the mentorship program for new educators in underserved schools, the scholarships for aspiring teachers from disadvantaged backgrounds. Patricia listened with evident enthusiasm, occasionally offering insights from her own lengthy educational career. This is thoughtfully constructed, she observed when I had finished. Not just throwing money at problems, but creating sustainable systems that address root issues in educational equity. That's exactly what we're aiming for, I confirmed. Impact that outlasts any individual grant or program. As our lunch concluded, Patricia reached across the table to clasp my hand. Eleanor, may I offer some perspective as someone who's traveled this road a bit further than you have? Please do, I encouraged, recognizing the rare value of wisdom from someone 20 years my senior. This tension with your son, it's painful now, but it's also necessary and potentially transformative for both of you. Her blue eyes held mine steadily. You're challenging not just his assumptions about you, but his entire worldview about aging, gender, and capability. That's profoundly uncomfortable for him, but it's also a gift, an opportunity to grow beyond the limitations of his own thinking. Her framing shifted something in my perspective. I had been seeing the conflict with James primarily as a personal rejection, a failure of our relationship. Patricia suggested it might also be a catalyst for his growth, albeit an unwelcome one. And for you, she continued, this is about so much more than correcting his misperceptions. It's about finally integrating all aspects of yourself into a coherent whole. The educator, the investor, the mother, the philanthropist. No more compartmentalization, no more diminishment. That integration feels both liberating and terrifying, I admitted. Of course it does, she chuckled. We've spent decades carefully separating these aspects of ourselves, keeping them in tidy boxes that don't threaten others' comfort. Integration means authenticity, and authenticity invariably creates disruption in ourselves and in our relationships. As we walked to our cars, Patricia asked about the foundation launch event. When I shared my nervousness about speaking publicly, she smiled knowingly. Would you like some moral support? I could extend my visit by a day. The offer touched me deeply. I would be honored to have you there, Patricia. Your presence would mean a great deal. Then it settled. She embraced me again before departing. And Eleanor, remember that claiming your accomplishments isn't pride, it's truth. False modesty serves no one, least of all those who might be inspired by your example. Patricia's wisdom accompanied me through the following days as I finalized preparations for the foundation launch. Her perspective helped me recognize that my journey wasn't just about personal authenticity, but potentially had broader significance. By claiming my capabilities publicly, I might help challenge limiting assumptions about older women and financial acumen. The day before the event, Bernard invited me to lunch to review final details. As we discussed logistics, he commented on my apparent calm. "You seem more at peace with this public role than I expected," he observed. "What's changed?" "I had lunch with my former mentor," I explained, describing Patricia's insights about integration and authenticity. She helped me see that claiming my financial accomplishments doesn't diminish or contradict my identity as an educator, it completes it. Bernard nodded thoughtfully. "She sounds like a wise woman. And she's right. This foundation represents the perfect integration of both aspects of your life's work." "There's something else," I added. "Something I've been considering since our conversation. The foundation announcement will make my financial success public knowledge. James will inevitably learn about it, possibly through media coverage rather than from me directly." "That concerns you," Bernard noted. "It does. Despite our current tensions, he deserves to hear the full truth from me before it becomes public. I'm considering reaching out to him, suggesting we meet before the launch event." Bernard considered this carefully. "That's a generous impulse, Eleanor. But are you prepared for his potential reaction? Learning about your financial success, after being kept in the dark for decades, that's a significant revelation." "It will be difficult," I acknowledged. "But continuing to avoid the conversation feels dishonest at this point. And I've reached a place where I can share this truth without either apologizing for it or wielding it as a weapon." "Then I think it's the right decision," Bernard affirmed. "Regardless of the outcome, you'll know you approached this pivotal moment with integrity." That evening, I composed a carefully worded email to James, requesting a private meeting the following morning. "There are important matters we need to discuss before tomorrow evening's foundation launch," I wrote. "I believe you deserve to hear certain truths directly from me, rather than through other channels." His response came quickly. "I'll be at your house at 9 a.m. The night before this crucial conversation, I found myself revisiting old family albums, photographs documenting James's childhood, Richard's too brief presence in our lives, the years of raising my son alone. In these images, I could trace the gradual construction of my carefully managed identity. The modest clothing, the practical haircuts, the deliberate absence of anything that might signal financial comfort beyond a teacher's salary. I could also see the values I had tried to instill in James: appreciation for education, respect for hard work, understanding that character mattered more than possessions. Had I failed so completely in transmitting these values? Or had my method of concealment somehow undermined the very lessons I hoped to teach? The morning arrived with clear skies and gentle sunshine. I prepared coffee and arranged a plate of James's favorite almond pastries on the dining room table. At precisely 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. James stood on the porch, his expression guarded but not hostile. "Mom," he greeted me with a nod. "Thank you for coming, James," I replied, inviting him inside. "There's coffee in the dining room and those almond pastries you've always liked." As we settled at the table, an uncomfortable silence stretched between us. James fidgeted with his coffee cup, clearly waiting for me to initiate the conversation. "James," I began carefully, "I've asked you here because there are things you need to know about my financial situation. Truths I should have shared with you long ago. He looked up sharply. Is this where you finally admit you're overextended? That these renovations and this foundation are draining your limited resources? The assumption, so confidently stated despite all evidence to the contrary, might once have frustrated me. Now, with Patricia's wisdom fresh in my mind, I recognized it as the final expression of a perspective about to be fundamentally challenged. No, I said gently. This is where I tell you that for the past 45 years, I've been building an investment portfolio that currently totals just under $5 million. James's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. That's not funny, Mom. It's not meant to be, I replied evenly. It's the truth. The foundation being announced tonight will launch with an initial endowment of $2 million. The renovations are being funded from investment income, not principal or savings, and educational trusts have already been established for Emma and Lily. The color drained from his face as he processed this information. That's impossible. You're a retired teacher. You've lived modestly your entire life. You darned socks rather than buy new ones. Yes, I acknowledged. Those choices were deliberate, not necessary. After your father died, I continued the investment strategy we had begun together. Over decades, with careful management and compound growth, our initial modest inheritance grew substantially. And you never told me? Disbelief was giving way to something harder in his expression. All these years, you let me believe you. We're scraping by on a teacher's pension? I made a decision when you were young, I explained, maintaining a calm tone despite his growing agitation. I wanted you to develop values based on character rather than financial expectation. I wanted you to work hard, to earn your accomplishments rather than expecting them to be provided. So you lied to me. For decades. His voice had an edge now, sharp with betrayal. While I worried about your financial security, while I made career decisions partly based on eventually needing to support you, you were secretly wealthy? I was private about my finances, I corrected gently. That's different from lying, and I was never wealthy in the way you're implying. I lived modestly by choice, reinvesting returns to build something meaningful for the future. James stood abruptly, pacing the dining room. I don't understand. Why reveal all this now? Why suddenly start spending on renovations and establishing foundations after hiding this for so long? This was the crucial question, the one that required the most honest answer. Because your attempt to take control of my finances based on assumptions about my capabilities made me realize how thoroughly I had constrained myself to meet others' expectations. It catalyzed a recognition that the time had come to live more authentically, to integrate aspects of myself I had kept carefully separated. So this is about punishing me? He demanded. Making me look foolish for trying to protect you? No, James, I said firmly. This isn't about you at all. It's about me finally living truthfully after decades of unnecessary constraint. The timing was prompted by your actions, yes, but the transformation is about my autonomy, not your control. For several minutes, James continued pacing, processing this revelation with visible difficulty. I remained seated, allowing him space to absorb what must be a profoundly disorienting recalibration of his understanding. Finally, he returned to the table, his expression both confused and defensive. I need time to process this, he said stiffly. It changes. Everything. I understand, I replied. It's a significant revelation. But I wanted you to hear it directly from me before tonight's public announcement. The foundation launch, he murmured, almost to himself. So everyone will know. Yes, my financial management will become public knowledge, along with the foundation's mission and initial projects. He nodded mechanically, then stood to leave. At the door, he turned back, his expression still stunned but with something else emerging. A reluctant curiosity. $5 million? Really? Really, I confirmed. Built over 45 years of disciplined investing and careful management. I never suspected, he admitted. Not once. That was by design, I acknowledged. Though in retrospect, perhaps not my wisest choice where you were concerned. As he left, I felt neither triumph nor regret, but a quiet certainty that this difficult conversation had been necessary, not just for transparency before the public announcement, but for the possibility of eventually rebuilding our relationship on more authentic ground. Patricia's words echoed in my mind. This tension with your son, it's painful now, but it's also necessary and potentially transformative. For both of you. Whether James could ultimately move beyond feeling deceived to understanding my choices remained to be seen, but at least now the truth stood between us, challenging and uncomfortable, but real. That evening, as I prepared for the foundation launch, I received a text message from Patricia. Remember, claiming your accomplishments isn't pride, it's truth. I'll be in the front row, watching you shine. Her words bolstered my confidence as I dressed in a new outfit purchased specifically for this occasion, an elegant navy suit that projected both professionalism and quiet authority. For the first time in decades, I would present myself publicly not as the deliberately diminished version I had maintained for so long, but as my complete integrated self, educator, investor, philanthropist, mother, and now, foundation president. The journey ahead would undoubtedly bring further challenges, particularly in rebuilding trust with James. But with Patricia's mentorship and the growing confidence that came from living authentically, I felt prepared to navigate whatever difficult terrain lay ahead. The wilderness of transformation was giving way to something new, not a return to familiar territory, but the creation of a landscape where all aspects of myself could exist in harmony rather than contradiction. The Grand Hotel's Magnolia Ballroom had been transformed for the foundation launch event. Elegant displays showcased proposed initiatives, including architectural renderings of the Teacher Resource Center at Jefferson Elementary. Photographs of Richard teaching his economics classes lined one wall, honoring the foundation's namesake. At the entrance, a professional banner displayed the foundation's logo, a stylized open book with the tagline, Investing in Educational Excellence. I arrived early with Bernard to oversee final preparations. Christine Weber and her team had handled most arrangements, but I wanted to personally review everything before guests arrived. As we walked through the space, Bernard nodded approvingly. The presentation strikes exactly the right tone, he observed. Professional and substantive without being ostentatious. It reflects the foundation's values perfectly. And mine as well, I agreed, feeling a surge of pride at seeing my vision manifested so thoughtfully. Staff members bustled about, arranging refreshments and adjusting lighting. A small stage held a podium and several chairs for board members and key speakers. A modest string quartet was setting up in the corner, preparing to provide background music during the reception. "Are you nervous about your speech?" Bernard asked as we reviewed the event timeline. "Less than I expected," I admitted. "Patricia's perspective has been invaluable. She helped me see that sharing my financial journey isn't about self-promotion, but about transparency and inspiring others." "That's precisely right," Bernard affirmed. "Your story challenges assumptions about older women and financial capability. That has value beyond your personal journey." Christine approached with her tablet, reviewing last-minute details. "The media representatives will be seated at the designated table," she explained, indicating a section near the stage. "We have confirmations from the local newspaper, 2 regional business journals, and the education reporter from Channel 8 News." The media presence was more extensive than I had anticipated, reflecting growing interest in the foundation since preliminary announcements had been released. The foundation's substantial endowment, combined with my background as a retired teacher rather than a traditional wealthy philanthropist, had apparently sparked curiosity. "Is there anything you'd like to clarify or adjust before guests arrive?" Christine asked. I glanced around the meticulously prepared space, feeling a momentary surge of doubt. Was I truly ready for this level of visibility? For decades, I had deliberately avoided attention, carefully maintaining a modest public persona. Now I was willingly stepping into a spotlight that would illuminate aspects of myself I had long kept hidden. Before I could respond, the ballroom doors opened, and Patricia entered. Elegant in a deep burgundy suit, she approached with the confident stride that had intimidated generations of students and earned the respect of countless colleagues. "Eleanor Winters," she declared warmly, embracing me. "About to launch a multi-million-dollar educational foundation. If someone had told me this 45 years ago when you were nervously preparing your first classroom, I wouldn't have been the least bit surprised." Her absolute confidence in me dispelled my momentary uncertainty. "You would have believed it possible?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Of course," she replied matter-of-factly. "You always possessed exceptional clarity about resources, how to acquire them, allocate them, and maximize their impact. That you've applied that clarity successfully in financial domains simply confirms what was evident in your teaching approach." As I introduced Patricia to Bernard and Christine, other guests began arriving. School board members, educational, administrators, nonprofit leaders, and community partners filled the space, creating a buzz of anticipation. I greeted each personally, answering questions about the Foundation's mission and planned initiatives. Dr. Martin Reynolds, the retired superintendent serving as board chair, arrived with Elizabeth Chen, creating a visible bridge between educational leadership generations. Several of my former teaching colleagues appeared, their surprise at the scale of the foundation evident in their expressions, but quickly replaced by genuine support and enthusiasm. 30 minutes before the formal program was scheduled to begin, I noticed a commotion near the entrance. Turning, I saw James and Veronica standing in the doorway, both impeccably dressed and surveying the room with evident surprise. Behind them stood Emma and Lily, looking somewhat uncomfortable in formal attire, but with excitement brightening their faces when they spotted me. James had given no indication he would attend after our difficult morning conversation. His presence, along with his family's, suggested something significant, though whether it represented tentative reconciliation or continued monitoring of my supposed decline remained unclear. I crossed the room to greet them, conscious of curious eyes following my movement. "Thank you for coming," I said sincerely. "This means a great deal to me." James nodded stiffly, his expression guarded. "The girls insisted," he replied, though something in his tone suggested this wasn't the entire truth. "And I wanted to see what this was all about." "I'm glad you're here," I said simply. Turning to my granddaughters, I added, "You both look beautiful. Would you like to see the displays about the foundation programs?" Emma and Lily eagerly followed me through the exhibit areas, while James and Veronica moved toward the refreshment table. As I explained the Teacher Resource Center concept to the girls, I noticed their genuine interest and perceptive questions. "So this is what you're doing with your money?" Emma asked directly, gesturing toward the architectural renderings. "Creating resources for teachers?" "Yes," I confirmed. "The foundation will support educational excellence through multiple initiatives, all named in honor of your grandfather." "That's so cool, Grandma," Lily declared with adolescent enthusiasm. "Dad says Grandpa was really smart about money and stuff." "He was," I agreed. "And he believed deeply in educational opportunity. This foundation combines both aspects of his legacy." At the designated time, Christine gently guided me toward the stage, where board members were taking their seats. Dr. Reynolds would open the program, followed by Elizabeth Chen speaking about the Foundation's first major initiative. I would deliver the keynote address, formally announcing the foundation's establishment and outlining its mission and vision. As I took my seat, I scanned the audience, now numbering nearly 200 attendees. Patricia sat in the front row as promised, her encouraging smile a beacon of support. James, Veronica, and the girls occupied seats toward the back, their expressions varying from curiosity to continued wariness. Sarah had arrived late and stationed herself near a wall, giving me a discreet thumbs up when our eyes met. Dr. Reynolds approached the podium, his distinguished presence immediately commanding attention. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," he began. "We gather tonight to celebrate the establishment of the Richard Winters Educational Foundation, a significant new resource for our educational community." As he continued with his opening remarks, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had led to this moment. Just months earlier, I had been living a deliberately diminished version of myself, carefully maintaining a modest persona that concealed significant aspects of my capabilities and accomplishments. James's attempt to seize control based on assumptions about my declining competence had catalyzed a transformation that now culminated in this public claiming of my complete identity. Elizabeth Chen spoke next, outlining plans for the Teacher Resource Center at Jefferson Elementary with evident enthusiasm. She described how the center would provide access to cutting-edge teaching materials, technology, and professional development resources often unavailable in public school settings. This initiative represents exactly what effective philanthropy should accomplish, she concluded. It addresses systemic gaps with practical solutions while honoring the dignity and expertise of educators themselves. Then it was my turn. As Christine announced me, I rose and approached the podium, conscious of the momentous transition this public address represented. The room quieted, all eyes focused on the retired teacher now revealed as a successful investor and philanthropist. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady despite the significance of the moment. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate the launch of the Richard Winters Educational Foundation." I paused, scanning the audience briefly before continuing. Many of you knew me during my 35 years teaching at Jefferson Elementary. Some were colleagues, others were parents of students, and a few were even students yourselves. This observation elicited warm smiles and nods of recognition throughout the room. What most of you didn't know, what I deliberately kept private for decades, was that alongside my teaching career, I was building an investment portfolio that would eventually fund this foundation. A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience, though the information had been included in press materials released earlier that week. After my husband Richard's death, when our son was just 10 years old, I continued the investment strategy we had begun together. While teaching, full-time and raising James, I educated myself about finance through night classes and independent study. Over 45 years, through disciplined investing and careful management, our initial modest inheritance grew substantially. I glanced toward James, who was listening intently, his expression unreadable. I maintained a deliberately modest lifestyle, living well below my means while building resources for an eventual purpose that honored both Richard's financial acumen and our shared commitment to educational excellence. That purpose has now taken form in this foundation. For the next 15 minutes, I outlined the foundation's mission, governance structure, and initial initiatives. I explained the values underlying our approach: educational equity, teacher, empowerment, sustainable impact, and invited community partnership in identifying future programming opportunities. In closing, I said, I want to acknowledge that this foundation represents not just financial investment, but the integration of seemingly disparate aspects of a life's work: the educator and the investor, the caretaker and the strategist. These need not be separate or contradictory identities, but can inform and strengthen each other. I looked directly at Patricia, acknowledging her influence on this perspective. A wise mentor recently reminded me that claiming our accomplishments isn't pride, it's truth. And the truth is that financial acumen and educational commitment can exist harmoniously within the same person, creating opportunities that neither capacity alone could generate. As I concluded my address, the audience responded with enthusiastic applause. What followed during the reception exceeded my expectations. Community leaders approached with genuine interest in potential collaborations. Former colleagues expressed both surprise and admiration at this previously unknown dimension of my life. Media representatives requested interviews, curious about the journey from schoolteacher to philanthropist. Throughout it all, I maintained the calm, articulate presence that had characterized my teaching career, now applied to discussing financial strategy and philanthropic vision. The integration Patricia had described was happening in real time, no longer compartmentalizing different aspects of myself, but allowing them to exist harmoniously in a cohesive whole. An hour into the reception, as I finished speaking with a reporter from the Business Journal, I turned to find James standing nearby, observing the interaction with a complex expression. "You're very good at this," he said when the reporter departed. "Discussing investment strategies and endowment management as confidently as you once explained teaching methodologies." "Thank you," I replied, recognizing that his observation, while not entirely comfortable for him, represented a significant acknowledgement of capabilities he had previously dismissed. "The foundation is impressive," he continued after a moment. "The Teacher Resource Center especially. It's exactly the kind of practical support educators need." "That's what Elizabeth said," I agreed. "It addresses a genuine gap in the system." An awkward silence fell between us, laden with unspoken questions and unresolved tensions. Finally, James asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me about your investments, even after I was an adult?" The question deserved an honest answer. "Initially, as I explained this morning, it was about ensuring you developed values based on character, rather than financial expectation. Later." I paused, considering carefully. "Later, I think I was protecting something I valued about our relationship, your perception of me as primarily an educator rather than an investor, and perhaps avoiding potential judgment about choices that might seem contradictory from the outside." "I wouldn't have judged you," James said quietly. "I might have learned from you." His words held a note of genuine regret that touched me deeply. "That's my greatest miscalculation," I acknowledged. "In trying to teach you values by example, I withheld knowledge that might have been valuable to you." Before James could respond, Emma and Lily appeared at his side, their expressions animated. "Dad, have you seen the scholarship program details?" Emma asked excitedly. "They're going to support students who want to become teachers but can't afford college. That's exactly what I've been thinking about doing." This revelation clearly surprised James as much as it did me. "You want to become a teacher?" he asked. "Since when?" "Since forever," Emma replied with teenage exasperation. "I've told Mom, like 1,000,000 times. I just haven't mentioned it to you because you're always talking about business school and law school and how teaching doesn't pay enough." The irony of this exchange, a perfect encapsulation of how limited perspectives can inadvertently constrain others' authentic aspirations, was not lost on either James or me. Our eyes met briefly over Emma's head, a moment of shared recognition that perhaps the patterns I had established were being unconsciously perpetuated in his relationship with his daughters. "The foundation will be accepting its first scholarship applications next spring," I told Emma. "If teaching is truly your passion, I hope you'll consider applying." "Even though I'm your granddaughter?" she asked dubiously. "The selection process will be handled by an independent committee," I explained. "All applications will be evaluated on their merits, not family connections. But regardless of that outcome, I'll always support your educational goals." As the event wound down, Patricia approached to say goodbye, her flight back to Arizona scheduled for early the following morning. "Magnificent," she declared, embracing me warmly. You claimed your full self tonight, Eleanor, and did so with grace and authority. Richard would be immensely proud. Thank you for being here, I replied sincerely. Your perspective helped me approach this evening with confidence rather than anxiety. Remember this feeling, she advised. This integration, this wholeness. It's what we work toward our entire lives, though many never achieve it. As guests departed and staff began dismantling displays, I found myself standing alone briefly, absorbing the significance of the evening. The foundation launch had represented not just the public establishment of a philanthropic organization, but my emergence from decades of deliberate self-constraint into fuller, more authentic self-expression. Bernard joined me, his satisfaction with the event's success evident in his expression. A remarkable evening, Eleanor. The foundation has launched with exactly the right combination of professionalism and personal vision. It feels like a beginning, I observed. Indeed, he agreed. The beginning of the foundation's work, certainly. But also, perhaps, the beginning of a new chapter in your relationship with James. I glanced across the room, where James was helping the girls with their coats. Our morning conversation and his presence at the event suggested potential for eventual reconciliation, though the path forward remained uncertain. One step at a time, I said. Tonight was about establishing the foundation and publicly acknowledging aspects of myself I've kept hidden for too long. The relationship with James will require its own careful attention. As I prepared to leave, Emma and Lily rushed over for farewell hugs. We're so proud of you, Grandma, Emma declared with adolescent intensity. You're totally inspirational. Lily nodded enthusiastically. Dad says you built all this by yourself after Grandpa died. That's amazing. Their admiration was touching, but James's apparent acknowledgement of my accomplishments to his daughters was even more significant. It suggested he was beginning to assimilate the revelation of my financial success, perhaps even finding aspects to respect rather than resent. Driving home after the event, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not just in the successful launch of the foundation, but in the personal victory of public self-integration. For the first time in decades, I had presented myself authentically, without diminishment or compartmentalization, and had been accepted on those terms. This victory, while perhaps modest in objective terms, represented a crucial milestone in my journey toward authentic living. The foundation launch had forced me to claim my capabilities publicly, to stand firmly in the truth of my accomplishments without apology or qualification. As I entered my home, now nearly halfway through its renovation process, I noticed how the physical transformation of my living space paralleled my internal transformation. Just as walls had been removed to create more open, integrated spaces, within the house, the artificial barriers I had maintained between different aspects of myself were gradually dissolving, allowing for a more cohesive identity to emerge. The evening's events had demonstrated that integration was not only possible, but potentially transformative, both personally and in my relationships with others. James's presence at the launch, while not representing full reconciliation, suggested openness to reassessing his perception of me. The girls' enthusiasm indicated potential for richer, more authentic connections with my granddaughters based on my actual capabilities rather than a carefully constructed persona. As I prepared for bed, I felt neither triumph nor vindication, but something quieter and more sustainable. The peaceful satisfaction of having taken another significant step toward living truthfully. The journey ahead would undoubtedly bring further challenges, particularly in rebuilding trust with James. But tonight had confirmed that authentic self-expression, however difficult initially, created possibilities for connection and impact that self-diminishment never could. Patricia's words echoed in my mind. Remember this feeling, this integration, this wholeness. It's what we work toward our entire lives, though many never achieve it. Tonight, I had experienced a taste of that wholeness, Not complete or perfect, but genuine and sustaining. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new challenges in navigating this evolving identity. But the foundation had been successfully launched, both literally in the form of the Richard Winters Educational Foundation, and figuratively in my emergence as an integrated, authentic self, no longer constrained by others' limited perceptions or my own unnecessary boundaries. The week following, the foundation launch unfolded with unexpected momentum. Media coverage exceeded Christine's predictions, with the local newspaper running a front-page feature titled Retired Teacher's Secret Success: How Eleanor Winters Built Millions Through Strategic Investing. Regional business journals published in-depth profiles exploring my investment philosophy and approach to philanthropic giving. The education reporter from Channel 8 News aired a segment highlighting the Teacher Resource Center initiative, interviewing Elizabeth Chen about its potential impact on classroom instruction. This public attention, while affirming the foundation's mission, also created a jarring shift in how people engaged with me. At the grocery store, the pharmacist, even at church, individuals who had known me for decades as the modest retired school teacher now approached with curious questions about investments and financial strategy. Some interactions felt genuine, reflecting sincere interest in the foundation's educational mission. Others carried an uncomfortable undercurrent of fascination with the financial aspects, as if my worth as a conversation partner had suddenly increased alongside public knowledge of my net worth. 10 days after the launch, Bernard invited me to lunch to discuss the foundation's operational progress. We met at Westfield's, an upscale restaurant downtown where financial professionals and executives typically conducted business meetings. As the maitre d' led us to a prime table, I noticed several patrons glancing in my direction with new recognition. "You're adjusting to your public profile," Bernard observed as we settled in our seats. "It's a significant change after decades of deliberate privacy." "It feels strange," I admitted. "Yesterday at the pharmacy, Mr. Peters asked for stock tips. The same Mr. Peters who has filled my prescriptions for 15 years without ever inquiring about anything beyond my health." Bernard nodded understandingly. Sudden visibility after prolonged privacy creates a disorienting shift in social dynamics. People are recalibrating their perception of you. While I'm still recalibrating my perception of myself, I added wryly. Our conversation turned to foundation matters. The board's first official meeting scheduled for the following week, implementation timelines for initial programs, potential community partnerships emerging from the launch event. The foundation was transitioning smoothly from concept to operational entity, with Christine Weber's experienced guidance ensuring proper systems and protocols were established. "The foundation office space renovations will be complete within 3 weeks," Bernard reported. "The downtown location provides excellent accessibility for educational partners while maintaining professional surroundings appropriate for donor and board meetings." The downtown office represented another significant change, a physical location where I would maintain regular hours as foundation president, engaging directly with educational leaders, potential donors, and community partners. After decades of classroom teaching followed by a relatively private retirement, this new professional role required adaptation to different rhythms and expectations. As our lunch concluded, Bernard raised a topic I had been deliberately avoiding. "Have you had further communication with James since the launch event?" "Limited," I acknowledged. "He texted the following day to thank me for including the girls. I responded with appreciation for their attendance. That's been the extent of our direct contact. And your assessment of where things stand?" I considered the question carefully. His presence at the launch represented a step toward potential reconciliation, but revealing my financial success after decades of concealment created a fundamental rupture in trust. Rebuilding that trust will require time and mutual effort. Bernard nodded thoughtfully. Family relationships often prove the most challenging aspect of significant life transitions. Professional associates generally adapt more readily to evolving identities than those who have known us most intimately. This observation resonated with my experience thus far. The foundation board, educational partners, even casual acquaintances seemed relatively comfortable with my emerging integrated identity. James, having known me longest and through multiple life roles, struggled most with reconciling the mother he thought he knew with the financially accomplished woman now stepping into public view. 2 days later, I visited Jefferson Elementary to meet with Elizabeth Chen regarding implementation details for the Teacher Resource Center. The Foundation's first major initiative was scheduled to begin renovation during the upcoming summer break, with an official opening planned for the new academic year in September. Walking the school's familiar hallways evoked powerful memories. For 35 years, I had navigated these corridors as Ms. Winters, the third-grade teacher. Dedicated, respected, but deliberately modest in presentation and expectations. Now, I moved through the same space as Mrs. Winters, the Foundation, president, still dedicated to education but claiming a different kind of authority and impact. In the designated classroom, Elizabeth outlined the planned transformation with evident enthusiasm. "We'll remove this wall," she explained, indicating the barrier between two smaller spaces, creating an open area for collaborative planning. Technology stations will line this wall, with comfortable seating arranged to encourage teacher interaction. As she described the vision in detail, several teachers stopped by to express support for the initiative. Their genuine appreciation for the Foundation's investment in teacher resources affirmed the value of this particular project. Yet I noticed subtle shifts in how they engaged with me, a deference that hadn't existed when they viewed me simply as a retired colleague, a slight hesitation in their casual conversation, as if unsure how to relate to this new version of Eleanor Winters. "The publicity has changed how people see you," Elizabeth observed perceptively after the teachers departed. "That's challenging but ultimately necessary for the Foundation's success. Your personal story adds credibility and inspiration to our mission." "It's an adjustment," I acknowledged, "for everyone, including me." Following the school visit, I stopped at the community center to discuss potential collaboration with their after-school programs. Margaret Wilson greeted me with evident excitement, ushering me into her office where she had prepared an elaborate presentation of potential partnership opportunities. "We've developed these concepts specifically to align with the Foundation's educational equity focus," she explained, presenting a bound proposal with professional graphics and detailed budgets. "Each initiative addresses identified gaps in our current programming while supporting your mission." The thoroughness of the presentation impressed me, but I also recognized it represented a level of effort and attention Margaret had never directed toward me during my years as a volunteer. The Foundation's resources had transformed me from helpful community member to potential major donor, a shift in status that altered the fundamental dynamic of our interaction. As I drove home that afternoon, I found myself reflecting on these subtle but pervasive changes in how people engaged with me. The public acknowledgement of my financial accomplishments had created new opportunities for impact, certainly, but it had also introduced complications I hadn't fully anticipated. Navigating these altered relationships required continual discernment between genuine connection and transactional interest. The house renovation was nearing completion, with contractors finalizing details in the kitchen and master suite. Adrienne Porter had created spaces that beautifully balanced elegance with comfort, sophisticated design with practical functionality. The transformed home reflected my authentic aesthetic preferences while honoring the property's historical character, a physical manifestation of my emerging integrated identity. As I entered through the new side entrance, designed to provide convenient access from the driveway, my phone rang. The screen displayed James's name, our first direct communication since his brief text after the Foundation launch. "Hello, James," I answered, trying to keep my tone neutral despite the surge of both hope and apprehension his call triggered. "Mom." His voice sounded strained. "Do you have time to talk?" There's something important we need to discuss. Of course, I replied. Would you like to come over? Actually, I'm already outside, in the driveway. Surprised by his unexpected presence, I opened the door to find James standing on the porch, his expression troubled. I invited him inside, noting his momentary pause as he took in the completed renovation. The rich colors, elegant furnishings, and thoughtful design elements that had transformed the familiar space. It looks, he began, then stopped, seemingly unable to find appropriate words. Different, I supplied, but still home. He nodded tightly, following me to the living room where we sat in the new seating arrangement. Comfortable chairs positioned for conversation rather than oriented toward the television as before. For several moments, James seemed to struggle with how to begin, his fingers nervously adjusting his watch band. I received a call from Roger Jenkins at First Meridian Bank yesterday, he finally said. He mentioned you had inquired about establishing a significant line of credit against your investment holdings. The statement carried multiple layers of complexity. Roger Jenkins was James's colleague and golf partner. First Meridian was where James had worked for 15 years, gradually ascending to his current position as Vice President of Commercial Lending. And I had indeed contacted the bank, though not Roger specifically, to explore financing options for potentially expanding the foundation's initial programming beyond the current endowment. That's correct, I confirmed. I'm considering leveraging a portion of my holdings to increase the foundation's immediate impact. The board is exploring several high-priority initiatives that could benefit from accelerated implementation. James's expression tightened. Mom, establishing a line of credit against investment holdings is a significant financial decision with complex implications for tax liability, asset management, and long-term financial security. The familiar tone, concerned, slightly patronizing, implicitly questioning my comprehension of financial matters, triggered an immediate defensive response I struggled to contain. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.